Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in a small town as a quality control technician. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job, that's for certain. So I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2019, which was odd to me. I had no kind of high expectation of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home as I had 2 children at home and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard and it made pretty good money for all duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months and I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly until one day I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll name him John. Well, John was a pretty good guy and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity, so I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did hang out pretty frequently. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a jerk sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions. Dude, when he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we had only been friends for a month, so I thought that maybe he was being morbid jokingly, so I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking." She really did. That concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months, they're still together and we all hang out pretty regularly, forgetting the things he told me then. One day, we were all talking and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude. I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you then, no one will." He said that he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out. Man, if you need somewhere to go then, you could come stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward to another year. He finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job and she asked me where he was and I said, "I have no idea. I thought he was with you and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by and he called the police about it. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around and I hadn't. He said, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. He said to me, "Because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people she has personal vendettas with." Here one of them. At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town. Took 2 weeks off of work. Come to find out, that next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on that list was mine. After they found the evidence and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided to not inform anyone else on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore and I dodged a bullet. Literally. I grew up in a small, rural town where nothing ever happens. The sort of place where it wasn't unusual to leave your doors unlocked and your closest neighbors are a mile or so from your house. Our family also had this giant old cat, Tag, who was a bit of a drama king, but we loved him. One summer when I was around 9 or 10 years old, the cat starts going ballistic. Tag generally slept in my room curled up next to me until I fell asleep and then would get up to do whatever cat things he did at night. Occasionally, he would meow or try to wake me up on unfortunate nights when he could see the bottom of his food bowl and needed a midnight snack. Usually, if I ignored him, he would give up or rarely go try to wake up my mom instead. This night, however, he bangs against my parents' bedroom door until he gets in and is meowing loud enough to wake us up. Our bedroom doors were next to each other and I called a Tag to come to bed because it's about 2 in the morning. He is having none of it and is carrying on. My mom gets up, goes down to the kitchen, and then huffs back up with Tag on her heels still meowing insanely. She said his bowl had plenty of food and he just walked her to the door of the kitchen. Tag was an indoor and outdoor cat but had his own cat door through the garage, so there was no need for one of us to let him out. My mom said my brother must have left the kitchen door open and just the screen door was shut, but she wasn't holding it open forever for the cat to just stand there and not go out. She shut the kitchen door and went back to sleep, firmly shutting her bedroom door this time so Tag couldn't let himself back into their room. I always kept treats for him in my room and offered him one, but he was still meowing at their door, trying to get them up. I grabbed him and brought him into my room and shut my door to try to get him to sleep. I lay in bed trying to go back to sleep and Tag meows at my door wanting back out. I finally open my door and he bolts back downstairs towards the kitchen, and that's when I heard what sounded like a door slamming. I have 3 older siblings though, and someone is always up watching television or running to the bathroom, so I think nothing of it. The cat finally stalks back into my room, but instead of curling up in my armpit like usual, he sat at the bottom of my bed staring at my door. I fell asleep until morning when some commotion wakes me up and I pad down to the kitchen to find my parents on the phone with the police. They got up as usual to get ready for work, and while making coffee my mom went to grab her rings from the little jewelry dish she had by the sink because she would take them off in the evenings to rinse dishes and load the dishwasher, but discovered the dish was empty this morning. Small town, so the sheriff sends a deputy over, and when my dad walks out to meet them, sees the ATV is missing from out back. The key is off the key ring. My brothers are all up at this point too, and we are all freaked out that while we were sleeping some robber came in and removed the ATV key and saw an opportunity to take my mom's rings. They were asking if we had any clue when it happened and my parents say no. My mom asked my middle brother, who was a freshman in college and home for the summer, what time he ended up off the couch last night and if he heard anything. He said he went to bed at 10 or 11 and asked what she meant as his bedroom was in the basement and he wouldn't have heard anything in the kitchen. She said, but you were in the living room off the kitchen when I went to feed the cat and shut the door you left open, and I told you not to sleep on my couch and go to your bed as I went back upstairs. He told mom he was in the basement since dinner and never went out or came upstairs again. He watched a movie in the basement living room before going to bed in his own bedroom. She goes white and realizes that the cat must have been trying to warn us someone came into the house, and the robber dove onto the couch and covered up to hide when she came to the kitchen and exited after she went back to bed. The cops said for someone to be so brazen they probably knew our family, knew our habits, but didn't count on the cat being so overprotective and had probably intended to steal more but was afraid the cat may wake the whole house. It has been over 20 years since this happened and the robber was never caught, but it is unnerving to think it was probably someone who had been to our home before as a friend. Thank God for our cat. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. So this happened about 4 months ago now, maybe more, but I really don't know for sure. Anyways, I was 19 years old, I've turned 20 by now, middle of February. I was going home from university after classes. I usually take my keys with me, but around that time, I had lost them and my mom was yet to take me get a new copy. I remember I kept insisting, but she wouldn't listen, so what I did was knock on the door to get my younger brother's attention so he'd come and let me in, but my mom also took his keys and just left him there locked up as well. I asked my brother to pass me my charger from my room and I called one of my aunts to see if I could go hang out at her workplace in the meantime. She said yes and then told me to call an Uber that she'd be paying for as soon as I got there, and that's what I did. Now, the Uber didn't pick me up exactly at home. It was in the house across the street instead. No special reason, it just did. The moment I saw the guy, he gave me kind of a weird vibe, but I also tend to be paranoid every time I so much as hop on a taxi, so I just got in, rolled down the window, and kept a grip on both of my phones. It all seemed relatively normal until we got to the area where my aunt's workplace was. This was a convenience store at our home in a housing. He just completely drove past it and claimed he was following the GPS when I asked him about it, but he wouldn't let me see said GPS. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Now, I was kind of doomed from the beginning cause I don't know directions and I could only rely on the driver being a decent person and recognizing the area, which I did, but wherever he was taking me, I had no idea. I remember seeing this fountain that I could recognize from when mom drove to my uncle's place, but that was like way farther away from my aunt's place. By now, I was kind of thinking of what to do cause this guy drove past a ton of empty housings and a couple of them even seemed to be still under construction. Then he stopped near a place that looked like the end of civilization. We were literally on a hill and then he turned off the car. I got lucky in so many ways. Looking back on it, my phone had no credit. As soon as I thought of that, my aunt called me and asked where are you? And I literally felt my heart drop because I had no idea and this dude was just staring at me. I said I didn't know and asked him, hey, where did you take me? And he replied with I wouldn't know what to tell you, kid. That was enough for me. I grabbed my backpack and opened the door real quick with a loud that's fine. I'll see myself out and haul myself like I had it in a very long time. I remember even being afraid of carrying my backpack on the back in case he chased me and pull on it, so I was holding it in my hand with my hoodie wrapped around my waist as I thought of where to hide. I thought of knocking on someone's door, but for some reason that didn't seem safe to me at the moment. I remember telling my aunt not to hang up because he was still following me on the car. Then I saw an empty barren surrounded by concrete walls and a strong bar gate, except there was enough space under the gate to crawl in. So I literally threw the backpack and then crawled under. There was a huge electric control box and I opened it to crouch inside and hide. My aunt's still on the phone. She, my other aunt, and my uncle were all on a call with each other, putting credit on my phone and asking for my live location through WhatsApp cause I had no idea where I was, literally in the middle of nowhere. I waited there for like 2 hours and this guy wouldn't leave. I even had to go pee outside the box and immediately ran back inside. At some point, I'm guessing the guy left and my uncle got there in his truck. He didn't know where I was, so he kept honking and telling me to tell him when I could hear it closer. And then I finally did and got out. For a while, I thought maybe this had been a misunderstanding and I just jumped out of some guy's car like a maniac without even paying him. But then when I got home after staying at my aunt's pharmacy for a while until my mom, who still didn't know much about what had happened, picked me up, I checked the Uber app and not only did it say I had already paid, but it also said I made it to my destination, so I ruled that out. I had told my aunts not to tell mom about it because she goes insane at the minor inconvenience, so telling her this would only freak her out and she wouldn't be any help. I only let her know when I called her to come get me and on our way to get a copy of that key because of course something bad had to happen until she actually listened to me, and nowadays she always puts credit on my phone. It really could have gone terribly wrong. My parents believe this guy was a rookie who maybe felt sorry for me and let me go because if he had wanted to, he could have hurt me with some sort of weapon or just try to kill me right then and there. I don't even know anymore. I sent his profile to all the girls I know so that if they ever happen to get him as their Uber driver they can cancel. Since then, I don't take Ubers anymore. Wherever this guy is right now, I don't want to ever meet him again. Okay, I should start the story by giving a bit of background so that you understand the situation a bit better. I, a 4'9", 16-year-old girl at the time, had 2 dogs who were brothers from the same litter. Now, being boxers, they were relatively big and quite protective when need be. Vince was longer, much taller than his brother, and is usually the kind to sleep through a hurricane if we had one. His brother Maury was shorter but more muscled, stronger. Usually, these two were with me 24/7, as my mother used to work a lot and I was usually alone most of the day, sometimes even until after dark. This never really bothered me. I'd been left alone at home like this since I was 11. It never struck me that I had a reason to be worried. One day that my mom was working later, I was doing some household chores, feeding the dogs, doing dishes, stuff like that. I continued doing what I always had, a routine of tidying the house I had done every day for years. As I went to take the trash out of the bin, I started walking towards the door when Maury stepped in front of me. I tried moving around him, telling him to get out of my way and sort, but he refused to budge. This was certainly odd, and looking back on it now a few years later, I realized he was probably trying to stop me from walking outside. We continued like this for a few moments, me trying to get past him and him, of course, never moving from this spot. He was quite heavy as a big dog. It was difficult to lift him and even harder to get him away from something. Now, in the time we had been going back and forth with this interaction, Vince stayed happily asleep on his dog bed. I should note that from my kitchen, you can see the living room and bathroom. Usually we use the side door from the kitchen to enter and exit the house since it attached to the carport. After after a couple more minutes, I heard something I hadn't expected when I made one last desperate attempt to move Maury from his spot. He growled, which wasn't unusual as he had growled plenty in his life. What was unusual was that he growled at me. He had never done that before, not once. But for that reason, and that reason alone, I decided not to take the trash out that night. I simply tossed it in another room and left it be. A short time passed, maybe a half hour or so. I had gotten settled into my chair to watch a movie while I waited on my mom to come home. While I was watching the movie, I suddenly heard a quiet knock at the side door. As I mentioned earlier, you can clearly see the living room from the kitchen, so I heard the knock pretty well. It was already after dark, so I figured it was just my mother and she had somehow forgot her keys. I got up, went into the kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye I saw the hook near the door. The keys weren't there. To some people, that's not a big deal, but to me, it meant that the person knocking on my door was in fact not my mother. My mom is a bit of a routine-obsessed person, so if she actually had forgotten her keys, they would always be on the hook. I took a breath, preparing myself to just not answer the door, or if they didn't leave, to just tell them I wasn't interested in whatever was happening, and that they should leave. Thinking about it now, I really wish I hadn't even looked out the window on the door. I wish I had just sat back down, called my mom, and stayed out of sight. But of course, I walked in front of the door and immediately came face to face with a figure on the other side of the window. Now it was really dark, with just my neighbor's light shining from his porch, so I could only make out a couple things on this guy. He was tall, me having to peer up at him through the window to look at his face. He had long hair that looked like a shadow over his shoulders in the dim light, but the only facial feature I could really see were his eyes. God, I wish I hadn't seen them. I could see the spark of interest flare in them as he perked up when he saw me. They were wide and staring down at me. He took a step towards my door. Stepping up on the first of two steps, I heard him say something along the lines of my car broke down nearby. Could I come in and use your phone? Immediately, I thought of every bad thing that I had ever heard happening to a teenager home alone and tried to compose my nerves. I'm not sure what it was, but something told me not to trust this man standing on the other side of my door. I shouted back a quick no and an apology, hoping he was telling the truth and would just go to the next house over. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said it again, quite a bit louder. I thought for a quick moment he hadn't heard me, but then again, I know now that he most likely had. So I instead became a bit more confident. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Go to the next house. I shouted louder. For a moment he paused, as if contemplating what to do. Then he knocked again, louder than the first time I'd heard it. My heart rate increased as I stared at him. When I didn't react, he started to loudly bang against the door. I took a step back, praying to whatever god that he would either leave or my mom would be home early. I was usually a quiet girl, but my mom had a raptor knife. She could take him. He started to bang on the glass after a moment, my mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. Should I hide? Run? My phone was in the other room and I was scared to take my eyes off the guy. I was sure he would break through the glass. The banging was vibrating my eardrums, and apparently it was vibrating Maury's too. I saw him creeping up past the doorway, bending his head, teeth bared. He started to bark loudly. The guy stopped a moment, trying to see into the window at the floor where Maury stood. When he stopped barking, the guy mistakenly tried to jiggle the door handle. Now that's when Vince woke up. I swear to God, for a dog that was dead asleep 5 seconds prior, I'd never seen him move that fast. Never. In only 2 seconds, Vince had his paws up on the door, growling like a hellhound at the devil's sight at this man outside my home. The guy jumped, fell back and bolted it. I heard him say something as he started to run and saw another shadow. My mom came home shortly after I had sprinted across my carport to my neighbors. They called the police after I explained what had happened, and my neighbor had dragged his shotgun out before they even got there. He had insisted on looking for the guy. The police had said someone tried to pick the lock on my front door, but there was a lot of stuff in front of it and it was really old, so it didn't open anymore. I went to bed that night, uneasy and so very thankful I had 2 dogs who were not only strong and big, but one that was vigilant and one that could practically kill if you let him. A few weeks went by and we hadn't heard from the cops, so eventually I stopped trying to think about it. Another month went by, and although I was a bit scared of being home alone, nothing else seemed to happen. Then we got another visit from the cops. What they told me made my heart sink in my chest and still gives me chills to this day. They had caught the guys and realized they were stalking me. Yes, multiple guys. There were 2 guys that had apparently been stalking me without my knowledge for months. They had several photos of me, words they had written over them, awful words. The police had been fairly adamant that I changed my locks since they caught 2 guys and there was evidence of a third. We moved shortly after that. I still pass by that house sometimes when I go to visit friends or do stuff around the area. A chill runs down my spine every time I do. To think that they never caught one of the guys was scary enough. The fact they tried to break into my house was worse, not to mention that I hadn't even known they were watching me. I still think about it even now a few years later. I dread what would have happened if my dogs weren't there, and I dread even worse about what they had planned to do if I had opened the door door or they had successfully broken in. I suppose they weren't expecting my dogs since our backyard is fenced and they mostly stayed indoors since it was so hot where I lived. I thank the universe every day that I had them, especially now. My mom never worked until after dark again after that, which in all honesty was fine with me. So did the man they still haven't caught. Let's not meet. This is an old story, something that happened to me almost 20 years ago when I was 23. I was writing for a popular budget travel guidebook series and mainly worked in Central and Eastern Europe. Depending on the time of the year in which issues were being updated, I could be gone for several weeks or even several months at a time. I mainly traveled alone. I'd run into a few problems here and there, but my experiences were predominantly positive. I'd been working in the former Yugoslavia and was on my way to the Czech Republic from Sarajevo. It's a long journey by train, so I broke it up into several overnight stops. Zagreb first and then Budapest, making each leg around 8 hours. It was late January and bitter. There was probably a good 7 inches of snow on the ground, perhaps more in some places. I was exhausted and battling the remnants of the flu I picked up in Split. I left Zagreb in the late afternoon and expected to reach Budapest by around 10 at night. I bought my ticket in the travel center at the Zagreb train station. When I boarded the car, about half the compartments were empty, but there were definitely other people on it. Since the train wasn't crowded, I managed to find a compartment to myself, so I spread out a bit and prepared for a long ride. The first part of the ride was smooth. I worked on some guidebook stuff, wrote in my journal, stuff like that. However, a few hours into the ride we passed over the Hungarian border and things started to go awry. I heard them before I saw that they were a group of teen boys, about 5 of them that I could see, and they were loud. I could hear them running through the train car, laughing and cursing and banging on the compartment walls. They were loud and obnoxious, but it's not like the first time I'd ever been annoyed by a group of teenagers. I didn't look up, kept working on my writing, but as time went on they grew louder and louder. As they ran from car to car, they slid the train doors open with so much force that it sounded like a bomb going off every few minutes. And then the sounds got louder. That's when I noticed that they were standing outside my compartment, looking in at me. I could only see 3 of them through the small window, but there were definitely more. I'd seen them earlier. I glanced up at them, frowned, and then looked away. I learned that the best way to deal with that kind of thing was to ignore them. I didn't want to encourage their behavior, but ignoring them seemed to have the opposite effect. Girl, they hollered at me. Come have fun. My compartment door was closed, but they proceeded to mess with me by slowly opening it, pretending they were going to come in, and then shutting it again. It went from chanting girl to a much more ominous we're gonna screw tonight and you screwed us all, followed by a bunch of slang words for female body parts. Some of the more universal ones I had no trouble understanding. At this point I grew very nervous. How was I to know whether they were just messing around with me or serious? I couldn't exactly leave. To do so would mean walking through them. They were blocking my exit and my entrance, and they one pulled out a pocket knife. He stuck out his tongue, ran the blade across it, and then pointed it at me and grinned. The guy next to him made hand gestures towards me and laughed. I tried not to show anything, but in my mind I was quickly taking stock of what items I absolutely had to take with me if I made a break for it. My lack of reaction angered the one with the knife, so he switched from licking it to using it to penetrate the circle he'd made with his thumb and forefinger. He called out. If you die. Part of me figured that they couldn't really do anything. There were other people in the train car, after all, and they'd hear me scream. Surely someone would come and help me, right? The conductor hadn't come through since we did the border crossing, so he was due for a trip as well. I figured I only had to get through the next few minutes and they'd get bored and leave. It was at this point that I noticed the curtain on the door window. I know it sounds crazy, but that's when I lost it. I left the curtain open so that people walking by could see that the compartment was occupied, but now all I could think is that if they came in, all they'd have to do was pull the curtain and nobody walking past would see what they were doing to me. At least one of them had a knife. They were all taller and bigger than me. I am 4'10" and weighed 98 pounds at the time, and they outnumbered me. I started to tear up. Would they kill me? Would I be seriously maimed? My daypack was in my lap, and the only things I had in there for weapons were a fingernail file and a butter knife. I reached into my bag and fumbled around until I had one in each hand, but just as they slid the door open and the first guy stepped inside, knife pointed at my crotch, another voice filled the corridor. I didn't need to speak the language to hear the anger. The guys ran from my compartment, one dropping the knife, and I watched as a middle-aged man dressed in blue stopped after them. A few seconds later, the train came to a grinding stop. The world outside was creepy. All I could see was snow and blackness. There were no lights in sight. After a few seconds, the train started back again. The boys didn't return, and I was just starting to feel some relief when the man in black returned to my compartment. He was a conductor. English, he asked, and I nodded. I made them leave. Dear God, and I thanked him, and he came into my compartment and sat down across from me. It felt felt good having another adult, a male, in there with me, especially an official one. I felt safer. It's okay, he said again. God, thank you, I replied again. I was scared. He nodded knowingly and then leaned back into the seat. It happens, he said. Sometimes we get this. They can hurt. I honestly felt like I was going to pass out from emotional exhaustion, but just as I was starting to let my guard down, the conductor leaned forward again and said, "You need the fee." "Oh," I said. I produced my ticket and showed him. "Here's my ticket to Budapest." He looked at it, shrugged, and handed it back to me. "This is a ticket." "Yes, but there's a fee for Hungary. You didn't pay." This was the second time I made that route, and I never had to produce anything extra on the train itself. Now I started feeling sick to my stomach. "How much?" I asked. I had very little cash. I was planning on taking money from the ATM in Budapest. He quoted me a number that was around 50 USD. For what it's worth, that's $10 more than when I paid for the actual ticket. I knew he was taking advantage of me. I wanted to argue, but then he said, "If you don't pay, then you have to leave now." We were literally rolling through the blackest night I'd ever seen. The snow looked like it would come to my knees. I didn't want to be dumped in the Hungarian countryside like the boys who were harassing me. I felt like I didn't have a choice. "I don't have any Hungarian money," I said. "I've been in Croatia and Bosnia." He shrugged. "I will take." He waited while I rooted around in my backpack and produced $30 in a combination of Czech, Bosnian, Croatian, and Slovenian bills. I left myself $20. "I don't have enough," I said. He shrugged again. "It's okay. I'll take." With that, he took the wad of cash and stuffed it into his pocket. Then he left. Once he was gone, I gathered my day pack and headed to the bathroom. I had to pass by the other compartments as I walked down the corridor, and it was at that moment I realized I'd been wrong. There were not other riders in the other compartments. They'd all left at some point. I was the only person in my car. If the guys had come in and attacked me, then nobody would have heard me scream. I'd have been on my own. I cried for 5 solid minutes into the tiny bathroom and then threw up in the metal sink. I never want to meet those guys or anyone like them again, and I could do without meeting the conductor again as well. So this event happened to be back when I was 20. It was going back from my aunt's house where I gave lessons to my little cousins each week. I was a student back then, and it happened in winter when it was quickly dark around 5 in the afternoon. I must also say that I am a woman. I was going back to the train station to take the direction of my home because I lived quite a few stations away from my aunt. At that time it was around 6 in the afternoon and it was really dark and cold outside, and I remember being quite tired that day, so I didn't give much attention to the direction the train I was waiting for was going to. As soon as the train came, I went inside, but it was really crowded, so I just stood up for quite some time, and that didn't help much with how tired I already was. After some time, a seat was cleared, so I went as fast as I could to sit there and let out a sigh that attracted the attention of the people beside me. I was a little ashamed by it, so I just looked at my phone and didn't pay much attention to others the rest of my ride. At some point though, I noticed the guy in front of me looking really intensely at me, but again I was so tired I didn't give it much thought and just continued watching whatever was on my phone at that time. As we arrived to a station, the train stopped and the driver informed us that it was the last stop. I had my headphones on, so I didn't hear all the message, but I deduced that I had to stay on the same train and it would just go back on the same line after some minutes. So while everyone went out, I just switched place to go somewhere with no one besides me on the wagon to sit comfortably near the window. But then when the train was soon to start again, the man that was looking at me earlier went straight in my zone and sat right in front of me. I was so focused on my episode I didn't pay much attention to it back then, but it was really strange because the whole part of the wagon was empty where I was and there were a lot of seats empty where he could have sat, but he chose to go exactly in front of me. The train started again and I was happy to finally be able to approach my home, but then as some stations passed I noticed something odd. The stations were the ones I already passed before. In fact, the train was going back to the direction of my aunt's house and not where I lived. I didn't heard that message right at all. I was a little pissed, but more importantly I laughed at myself because it was the first time I did such a mistake, and as I was smiling of my foolishness, I started looking around me and I saw the man that sat before me. He was also looking confused while switching his gaze to me in the windows. I laughed and gave him a smile because I thought he also got the wrong direction since he was in the same train for a long time now with me. But he didn't smile back at all. He stared right at me and seemed angry. I remember getting a chill at that moment, and my senses finally woke up to make me realize something was wrong with this man. I stopped the video I was looking at and started thinking. I had two options. The first one was to just stop next station and change side to take the train that would really get me back home. That was the most logic and normal option. But I don't know why something in my gut told me that I shouldn't go home tonight because of the man in front of me. So I decided to stay in the train and see if he would go off before me or not. After all, I was sure that it was not his direction too, so I stayed and at least 4 stations passed, but he didn't move at all. Instead, he seemed to get a lot more confused and angry each station. He was also staring at me a lot and switching to the windows each station as if he was waiting for where I would go down. The way he was looking at me too was really scary, so I tried to avoid his gaze as much as possible so he won't think I noticed him. At some point, he started giving me little pushes with his leg against my leg. It's like when the train is riding fast, and because of its movements, sometimes you touch people near you and bump slightly on them when it's crowded, but of doing it was not natural at all because the train was not crowded and he had space to seat away from me. So after some time, I was getting really awkward because of this, and even when I changed positions to be away from his legs, he would change too to touch me. It pissed me off, so I looked straight at him and then I knew I was in danger. He was looking at me with a big smile on his face as if the situation amused him. I was terrified, and when the train stopped again at a station, I didn't think and just jumped off my seat and went out. But he followed me. I was really scared and didn't know what to do. I really didn't want him to follow me home because I lived in a really secluded place, and if he were to follow me at some point, he could have done anything to me near my home as there would be no one to hear me or help me. I was thinking fast, and then I got an idea. I stayed near the train before the door closed and walked near it like nothing happened. He was still following me and looking at me, but I tried to remain calm. Then when I heard the sound of the door closing, I jumped inside the wagon again, and because it was right when the door was closing, he couldn't get in on time. I saw him looking at the doors in shock, and then he looked at me like he wanted to kill me. I went to sit back and kept looking at him to see what he would do. He seemed so angry, I was scared he would just break off glass and jump right at my neck. The train finally started again, and it was gradually getting away from the platform, but he kept looking at me with furious eyes and following it the whole time. When the train finally passed that station, I started breathing normally again. After that, I stayed on a few stations and finally got off and changed sides to take a train in direction of my home. I was looking behind me the whole time and ran home as fast as I could, and only when I was in my room I realized what just happened. That event was really a change for me as I was really carefree when I took the train or the subway, but from that time on I started being a lot more cautious of my surroundings, especially when going home at nighttime. So to the man I met in that train, let's not meet ever again, please. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.